Muy buenas tardes. Vamos a arrancar.
So, good afternoon. We're going to start this afternoon session. It seems like a bit difficult to launch, but we hope you're going to enjoy it. It's very important for us to start this afternoon session with this dialogue. So we're working around this sentence by Camus, art cannot be a monologue. We've seen 3 creators this morning who use different tools and use them in the reality and go into their inner self to start a dialogue with the rest of the world. And this afternoon, for me, it was essential to articulate this dialogue from one art to the other. And we have here with us 2 people, as you can see, but we've got a connection with Luis González Palma. Hello, Luis, from Argentina. Thank you so much for being with us in these Trobades. Thank you for being here this year that is so difficult, and this is the reality we are in. We are in this typical room with the audience and with one of the participants of the dialogue who is in Argentina, couldn't come all the way to Minorca, but we wanted him to participate in this conversation, in this dialogue from one art to the other, because we have Alejandro Castellote, who is a commissioner of photography, who started working in the field of images many years ago, and the fixed form of photographers. And here we have 2 artists also with very different trajectories and universes who are going to create a dialogue from one art to the other. They have a need to build their narrative, their writing, using several arts to feed their creation. And I would like to leave you with them. You have this afternoon for you. You have an hour and a half for the discussion. Thank you.
Bueno, muy buenas tardes.
Hello, good afternoon. It is a pleasure and it's really exciting to be here with you. Being with you is one of the things we most wished we could come back to participate with people, to enjoy with culture, learn, and to be together with other people, enjoy this space that enriches us so much. We miss Luis very much. These are the circumstances we're living, and there they also are in the same situation. As you can see, in Argentina it's winter, it's snowing a lot in Córdoba. And well, I'd like to start with something else. John and Luis are friends of mine, and this means I have a special relationship with them. And it also means that this conversation is going to be very easy. Luis was born in Guatemala, in Central America, in '57, but he moved to Córdoba, the province in Argentina, in 2001. He gave me a very neutral CV. There are personal exhibitions, the Art Institute in Chicago, the Lennon Foundation in Santa Fe in the US too, the Australian Center of Photography in Australia, the Palace of Beaux-Arts in Mexico, the Royal Festival in London, the Palazzo Ducale di Genova in Italy, the Macro and Castagnino museums in Rosario in Argentina, and he's participated in festivals such as Photofest in the one in Bratislava, also meetings in France, Foto España in Madrid, Singapore, International Photography Festival in São Paulo, Caracas. São Paulo is in fact Sao Paulo. In Brazil, he's participated in 49 exhibition, also in the Photo Bienal in Vigo, in Brazil, also in the Havana Bienal, in Germany, in the Taipei Art Museum, in Korea, in Taiwan, in the Museum of Beaux-Arts in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, in Zurich, also in the Palace of Conde Duque of Madrid, and also in Stockholm. And he's got many pieces of works in many different exhibitions all over the world. And John is going to give me his CV on his phone. Here I have it. John was born in 1978 in San Sebastian. He studied economy, and he's also an artist, art photographer. He goes from the intimate world and incorporates signs and symbols that are ancestral and brings them into the contemporary art. He's a synthetic artist. He searches for knowledge through introspective questioning, with the final purpose of a better understanding the surrounding context. Since 2007 till 2019, he worked in the Calerna project that he published in 2020 with Éditions Xavier Bernard in France, one of the most important publishers in photography, and also in Dalpin, which is a web and publisher and distributor of books. He's exhibited in public and private institutions like the Canal de Isabel II in Madrid, Caixa Forum, Tabacalera in San Sebastian, also in Cibeles in Madrid, the Museum Jorge Oteiza, that we will also visit, in the Guangdong Museum of Art, within the Ines Triennial Guangzhou, in Guangzhou, in China, in Belvedere Museum in the Netherlands, in the Albert Museum in Belgium, and he's also participated in many other international meetings like the Arles meetings, also in the Photo Festival in the Netherlands, in the Biennial in Southern America, in Photo Mexico and Photo España. Here you are. So, before we start, I'm going to explain how we're going to do this. Luis is in Cordoba, so we're going to present his works and he's going to comment on this, and we're going to show his works from here, from Saint-Louis, and then John will also show us his works very briefly, and then during the conversation we're going to go back to some of those images so that we can explain some of the processes and give some additional details. We were hurrying up, but I'd like to start thanking the Town Council of San Luis for deciding on organizing this edition that is so important for all of us. I'd like to thank Sandra Monarch and the whole team for having launched the Trobades with all the many problems and difficulties we've all had to face. And we're really excited to be here, to participate, and to spend this time with John and Luis. And I wanted to start with a quote from a philosopher that I like very much, Emilio Bedoc, who says, "The learning of freedom constitutes the memory of what we are. Human beings are what we are because of language, because of the possibility to communicate love and friendship. That world of sensibility has no code in opposition to language. And I would add to this, to love and friendship, art creation, artistic creation that has no code. There's this commonplace that says that photography is a universal language because it can be understood by everybody. And the three of us, we don't agree with this idea of photography being art, language. Language is because this is a social agreement that when we say table, we're referring to this. But in photography, that is not the case. We're all supposed to understand photography, but in fact, one of the most important aspects of understanding a picture is our point of view, from where we're looking at that picture, what is our collective imaginary, what is its geographical position, our mood, our previous individual experiences. And this is why something that as simple as a photography that is just a piece of paper, in fact, can provoke or make a mother cry when looking at the picture of her son, or making us feel sick if we're over 90 and we think about the Spanish Civil War. So photographies, pictures have this quality of being a switch for memory. We look at them differently, we each see different things in those photographs, because they go beyond the filters of subjectivity. They go through those filters. And then we start from this, we have to work over this stereotype of photography as being something that can be understood by all. I think Luis can see me, can't you? It's through that camera, right? So, Luis, do you have your sound? Can you speak? Luis, please. Luis, let me know when you want us to view your images. Just let me know. I will be doing that. Well, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to, yes, thank you for your invitation. I'm really, truly deep that I cannot be there with you. I'm going to be very brief because, in fact, I said that I wanted to dedicate the time for showing the images to, in fact, create the dialogue. So I'm going to be very quick. I'm going to try to take about 10 minutes for the images. And yes, that's good, because that way afterwards we can go back to any of your images so that we can talk about some of those details. I also have a few videos that show his exhibitions, and these will help us illustrate the conversation. So, Luis, I can start with the first picture. These images belong to the beginning of what I did in '89. Can we see the next picture, please? Yes, without the lights, it's better. Next, please. Very briefly, I like to talk about the context, because the context of childhood is key. I think the primary experiences, the first experiences, will mark the way we see the world. And these images that we are seeing, the result of a reflection of what I went through at the beginning. I have to guess because I cannot see the image now. Okay. The lights are off, and therefore I cannot see the images. It says the critical look. This is a paradigm in the sense that everything that I had been working on previously was linked to political and social aspects, also poetic aspects, and everything that was referred to as the magic realism in Latin American literature. And with this critical look, I try to abandon those decorative elements related to nature, to try to think about how I look towards the other, how I position myself there, and also to work on the perception, not only with regards to photography, but in general too. Time Out belongs to that same series. All these images were linked to that, with this process of trying to understand how we perceive the other, how we perceive the world. I was born in 1957, and in 1960s, the armed conflict started off in Guatemala, and it lasted for 30 years. So I lived in a country where we felt a lot of fear, and violence was something that marked me, and also the way I understand the relationship with others. Also the violence that was a subtle violence that was present at the time. This picture dates from 2003, 2004. That was my first project in Argentina, a very oniric project marked by the psychoanalytic thought that I find very interesting. This series here, and then next one. Next one.
Todo este cuerpo de trabajo fue prácticamente el inicio.
This was the beginning of projects that I started to carry out in Argentina. And then the next project on the mind, I think this is essential in my work, because this is when I started eliminating part of the image with a purpose. This is the sheet of Christ, and I think you can read that. It's Zurbarán, this one, I think Greco was the other one. And here I did these sculptures with tissue, copying this paint sheet of Christ when he was crucified, and leaving that absence there.
¿Puedes pasar a la que sigue, Alejandro?
Perdón.
Yo sé que vamos rápido, pero bueno, faltan 3 minutos.
I only have 3 minutes left. I don't want you to hurry up. It's not that. I'm not hurrying you up. These are other images, Annunciation. This is a project. This is a color project, and I hadn't used that earlier. Well, you know, I could spend hours talking about each of my projects, but I rather enjoyed the dialogue. This was commissioned by the Town Council of Madrid. It was a project on the city of Madrid, and we can discuss that later on if you want. This is autonomously, you know. This is a series that goes, your look is giving me away. It's from Guatemala, and well, it's a very complex topic. They need to carry out a project based on social phenomena was something that's very important for me. And it was printed. And as Alejandro said, I've tried to work out of the box, to come out of a rigid concept of photography. And I've carried out projects that have hardly much, well, not much to do with photography, like this one here. This was the copper extracted from the lightning cables of a house, and then I build these structures, this light candle, and then my teeth too, and then I get my teeth also made a sculpture of teeth out of white chocolate, and this was given to people who could eat it. So it's an expression of how the artist makes his work out of his body, and it is consumed by others. Well, I'm sorry, but this device is just jumping the pictures on its own. I only have 1 minute left, but I would like to jump over this, and I'd like to refer to another series.
Esa, por ejemplo.
Here, for example, this one.
Esta, sí. La anterior.
The previous one?
La anterior.
The previous one?
Voy a terminar acá.
I'd like to finish with this, in fact. Because I'd like to, enjoy the dialogue more than focus on the images. So I would like to spend more time on the dialogue. But this project was carried out in Guatemala. It's called the NECA project. And in the background, you have the National Palace. So I took a picture of the National Palace, and then I invited people to take a picture in the square. So with the palace, the picture of the palace in the back instead of the actual palace. And this was the game of the representation. I had been working on portraits for a long time, and I wanted to do portraits again, but in a different way, not this religiously loaded portrait with those shades that we had in the past, and now I wanted to do a different kind of portrait. So I think we can stop it there, if you agree, Alejandro, and then we can do something else and go back to this later. We're going to do the same thing with John, but this time you can hold this device so that you can enjoy it, all this skipping of the images.
Hola, vamos a poner la proyección de John.
All right, let's see now John's projection.
Molt bona tarda, jo soc John Cazenave. M'agradaria dir...
All right, my name is John Cazenave. I would like to say some words in Catalan. I'm from the Basque Country. I was born in the Basque Country. And I was thinking about all of this during my trip here. I was thinking about the dialogue of languages. So actually, I would like to thank the organizers for having allowed for all of this with their team. Now, a great deal of my work is the result of the tension that was experienced in the Basque Country since my childhood, since 1968, and I wanted to symbolize this in this way. I wanted to pay tribute to Oteiza and Chillida. These are two sculptures that you will know. They were working on the same ideas related to void. In a similar way, on the left-hand side you can see a metaphysical box, and it's quite a small sculpture, and here we're being told that what matters is not the matter, but rather what the matter holds, that is, the void, this empty space. And this, in this other work by Chillida is reflecting about the same. We could feel the inside and the energy that the mountain generates. So these two artists symbolize what I feel over there. And so you're either a follower of Oteiza or a Chillida. And I was born to be both Oteician and Chillidan. I think this is slow, isn't it? At the beginning, I used this documental photography to analyze the political conflict, and these images stem from that time. As you can see, I use black and white with a lot of contrast, and this is not only aesthetic. Black and white, to me, is a way to make this clash between black and white, and the contrast between those is actually a response to all the shades of gray, if you want, and actually it shows how the conflict has been polarized. And this work starts to try to find an issue to all of this. I started with images that were very close to photojournalism or documentary pictures. Anyway, I tried to use the aesthetic of clash. You can see here these images and how all this work is formalized. In this case, we're talking about the room Agunea Kutxa, organized by the Kutxa Foundation in San Sebastián in 2020. I'll try to go a bit faster. I don't know if this goes faster. Maybe we can turn down the light a little bit. This immense black that really invades it all, and this path towards what's rural, towards what's traditional, this fusion between human beings and nature leads me gradually to paths that are less corrupted by politics and violence and more inclined to myth. So this is a kind of shelter that I try to find. The myth is pure symbol. So this helps me to get away from that polluted environment, so that I can end up analyzing the landscape as a construction, the landscape very much related to photography, because landscape, after all, is just a territory that we see from a certain place with a certain heritage, a certain culture. And then there's also the possibility to start with this analysis of the homeland, or, you know, the fatherland, and in transition to the motherland. And this is the hole, or the cave, as an abstract remaining of a human being that has not yet been totally forgotten. It's still there. And here we're using this dialogue between the walls of the cave and the skin of my former girlfriend, Lourdes.
the hand, it's the first selfie, isn't it? It's important to remember all this past. After the cave, I feel some kind of illumination, and light is worth everything. And I feel that photography and art fulfills its purpose, its liberating purpose. And Alejandro was saying this as well. I started this project as a person from the Basque Country, but I finish it just as a person that has been freed up from all that political burden that was so damaging. And I feel that I owe to encounter, and I feel that I owe to abstraction. I was saying that my images are black, but they're not as black as you can see in the projection. Actually, they're being projected, highlighting the dark part. I would like also to say that I'm focusing more in natural aspects, in the atmosphere, the sea, the clouds, because sometimes the sea and the clouds can explain much, much more than what any book can tell. And here I am moving away from that idea of the great picture to give lots of information. And here I just move towards more graphic objects, like oriental objects, like a stain. And we'll talk about this later on, because I see that I'm taking longer. And here, so far, we can see the image and the picture as a sculpture, as a sculptural object. And we can see here the image of the wall, and this is interesting. I'm talking about a sculptural object, but not a sculpture. I would like to say that I believe that these images are related differently when we relate them in 2 dimensions or in volumes. And here, color. After 10 years of working intensely in black and white, we can see now color appears in the form of a pigment. And I incorporate that color, that pigment, to the pebbles that I get from the walks I make, from my hikes. It's just like, you know, incorporating landscape to the photography through that pigment. And all this crystallizes in an exhibition that you have seen, and in a book that, as Alejandro was saying, was published by Daipine and Edición Xavier Barral with the support of many people. And then I moved towards this other period, more geometrical period with color. You see that color appears, and color is given by the matter and by the pigment that I can gather from the mountain. And here I'm trying to find images that have a certain degree of openness. I feel cold, and I feel that I am being called. And these images are completed with these pigments, and this adds up layers to the image. And then I focus in the construction process of the image. These are phenotypes, and I use this, cyanotype, which is a salt, so that the sea can represent its own image. And I'm open to more contemporary aspects. These are just screenshots of the sea, and they're taken in the sea. And the formalization of these projects is quite different today. It's quite different from what you may have seen. these are open projects and they do not have a definite shape. But I would like to finish with this reflection, the scientific logic and the artistic logic. Scientific logic says that life or a career or a process is like a stairway to where you want to get. However, the artistic logic works in a different manner. It works in circles that we cover little by little. And if you're lucky enough in life, you will see that all those circles connect and they generate this complete flower. And when you light it up, I think that, well, you light it up and then it disappears so that you can start again. So it's a kind of sphere. And I think that we have already started here to get to this. Yeah, I was going to say that there's a certain consensus that art is in process. I've always been interested in asking artists, what is this moment that untangles the willingness to create something to be shared? Today we're talking about monologues, and I believe that there's a part in this creation process of artists, there's a kind of solipsism, and I found a definition that I love, and I love definitions actually. I love finding definitions. Solipsism. This is the thinking subject that cannot assert any other existence than its own. In other words, solipsism means that one focuses in its own world and everything which is revolving around this cannot be real. But well, this could be like a moment, right? But this could also become something that can be shared, something that can be communicated. Because at the end of the day, one of the essences of art is that art is sharing. I would like to repeat that question to Luis and to Jon so that we can move forward from their own processes and what all of this unravels. I mean, this willingness to create, to commit to a certain project. Luis? Well, basically, what rules here is the desire. If there's no desire, no wish for something, well, there would be nothing. And the wishing, this exists because something is far from our understanding. It's something that is difficult to grasp. It's like this kind of agreement with the world that I do not fully understand, and this leads me to try to wish to find images that would complete that, and images that would serve me, images that would serve the other. But I also feel that what we call creative process is something that comes from the desire to find. But, well, I cannot see this otherwise. It's just the fact of being attentive to those experiences which are, I think that I told you so. They are, and they help you build other worlds that accompany you in your habitat and your own life. And this is like this. I wish to find and to be aware and attentive to the experience that I have of life. I wish to find something, I still don't know what it is, but when I perceive that something is shown to me, it's like a spark that starts generating and something that will be a piece of work. Luis, you tell us very much about your relationship with psychoanalysis and image. this kind of link between those two, psychoanalysis and images. And sometimes you also refer to childhood and that need in childhood that is very well defined by you, the need to create a parallel world, because the world that you have is not enough. And you say that this is a moment in your life in which you cannot do anything with your own words and with the little words that you have and the little experience that you have. So you must live longer so that as an adult you can untie all those knots that were tied. And you know, I was thinking about it all, and then Luis told me when John came that, well, John would have a text that he would be reading later on. Hi, Luis. And I didn't even say hello. Now that we're starting to talk together, what I was discussing is that there's a text by a Brazilian geographer, Janner, which says that we're not building other spaces within spaces. What they do is they build another spatial reality in something inexistent. So this is creations, right? It's marvelous. It's like something that's created. How do they understand about spatiality?
Yes, there's all this world of childhood. There is a sentence that I thanked you for sending it to me, so it was a sort of a self-quotation. And you say it's not your quote, but it is the title of a conversation that you have. There it goes. No one comes undamaged from childhood. And this was a conversation with a psychoanalyst, and he goes, it's not yours, this sentence. And you say that sentence belongs to who says it. And then this reminds me of a film where Justino, well, the character is telling someone off for using a poem that is not his. And in fact, there's this sentence of Justino saying, poems belong to those who need them. And this sentence is a bit of the same thing. You have that link very present, this relationship of the lack of verbality and these first images that are so important for you, that you live in these kind of alternative museums, churches in Guatemala. Psychoanalysts is something that I find very interesting, and in France there's a lot of being done on the basis of memory and what one remembers, which is also a construct. And I remember Matute's sentence that said, childhood lasts longer than life. Childhood is essential in the construction, building of a human being. No matter, well, it doesn't really matter whether it was a good one or a bad one, but in any case, it will mark you. It will always mark you, and you spend the rest of your life trying to deal with those pre-verbal experiences, and that's where my need comes from. These, for me, I want to create a sort of work, a piece of work, because this appears when you are born. You're just there. You're brought to the world and you have no experience of it. And this lack or absence, in my case, that's an absence or something that was lacking, and that made me go searching for aesthetic experiences in Guatemala and in the churches that were there. And these churches have nothing to do with the churches you find in Europe. There's the indigenous secrecy, And that is where, as a child, I found experiences that now, as an adult, I realized that they've been living within me for all this time, during all these years, and I've always been trying to go back to them in a way or another. I find it interesting when we start thinking about this, you know, in this conversation, this talk. Well, I find it interesting that you both refer to a sort of path, a sort of journey that is calling for at least a mood that will help you or make you willing to opening to new channels. So you sort of do your journey, travel in a way of guessing what you want to do, but you are in fact already within the game, which is in fact very much linked to your creation process. In John's case, you refer to this example when you went out to take pictures. If you had bad weather or you didn't like the light, you started playing because you always carried a ball with you and used to play the Basque ball game. And you said that you had both the camera and the ball in different hands. Tell us about this game. This is a strategy game, in fact, because what you're looking for when you do that is to have your brain level go down, so you're not so present. At the beginning, I suppose you've seen that, I'm an economist, and my pictures at the beginning were pictures taken by an economist who was learning about image. And one of the techniques I used to learn was that, to walk so I could feel that I was doing something that had nothing to do with the productivity of generating images, and also playing the basketball. In the Pyrenees and in the Basque Country, in each village there is a wall for the basketball, and it's a sacred place, an empty space with a line drawn that will mark where you need to place the sphere above that line. And that is where the human being plays this game. And from the Basque point of view, but also in the US, you have this perspective of these, where you have to place this sphere in that empty triadium. Isn't it beautiful? Who wants to take pictures if you can play the Basque ball? These are very sculptural elements, so geographical elements, and such geographical elements, and it's linked to the ritual. And I was, you know, playing and then using my camera with the left hand. And then you find the rhythm and you see what Kandinsky got, and you think about it, and you feel alone when the light that is outside is something I don't like, or when I don't know how to interpret it. That's also interesting, because I also believe that photographs and images, in cases such as mine, in fact become an interpretation of the light in places. Galerna is that's it for me. And for me, it's the interpretation of how the light is illuminating my house. And when I don't like the light, or I don't know how to interpret it, I play the basketball, or I do other things. And today we heard about the importance of the body, and I found it very interesting, because what I do in this series is I use my body and I inhabit this space in a very harmonious way, and sometimes in a more violent way. And with the camera, I'm taking these images, and there's a registry there that I haven't shown many people yet, because I'm also working on some of my series in the very, very long term. I'd like to have Luis' PowerPoint now because I'd like to share a video with you in relation to what you're mentioning. He said he did this, well, you did this gesture with the left hand you take pictures, with the right hand you play. This is literally how you use the two different hemispheres and the body. And I'm really amazed by neuroscience. This is something I discovered many years ago. And I've tried to go towards rationalism. It's a path we use, or a way we use to defend ourselves from emotions. As men, we often do that. And I discovered that rationalism was making things difficult for me. And it was very simple. It was nearly maths. And then one day, I read the title of a book and an interview with Antonio Damasio, a Portuguese neuroscientist who works in the US, and he's got a book entitled Descartes' Mistake. And I thought, that sounds interesting. And he refers to this, and we're going to see it, this relationship of how we work with our hemispheres in our mind and our relationship to our body. So in the world of neuroscience, many experiments are being carried out to analyze how we use rational intelligence, emotional intelligence, and how the relationship of all this with the body. And one of the exercises they have is that they ask two people to walk, and one of them starts discussing a topic with a certain narrative, and they walk, and then suddenly he'll say, how much is it when you multiply 12 by 8? And then they stop walking to give the answer. So the optimization of the mind to send orders to the body comes from mechanisms that are very much linked to synergies, to what we've learned, to a certain reuse of orders that the body gives on a regular basis. But when the mind makes the other part of the mind work, then the body has to stop. The body has to stop so that the mind can think. And you may laugh at that. What, you need to stop your body to let your mind think? But that the answer is yes. And why am I talking about this? I'm going to refer to a series by Luis Mobius, and then we will come back to this one later, where I found this portrait, and we had it in an exhibition, and it's really big. And these are pieces of faces printed on rice paper. You remember that I was doing like this with this sheet of paper, and rice paper is even subtler. And Luis will refer to this, but this image is about the fragility of our identities. This is why he used rice paper. This is the element Luis chooses to make for the tools. You know, everything he uses in his interventions have a meaning, and here rice paper also has a meaning. So here the different fragments are not well placed or correctly placed, and the position, they're linked only by the upper part. They're joined only by the upper part. I'm going to try and find the videos at the end.
Y tan al final, ¿no? Lo que escuchamos. Luis, ¿me escuchas?
Luis, can you hear me? SOS. Where is the video on Mobius? Is it at the very end of the PPT? Yes. Where we couldn't have you on the image or project from my computer, and this is why things got complicated. I think it's around here somewhere. No, it isn't.
Bueno, sí, pero no hay problema. Lo cuento. Lo que ocurre.
No problem. I'll just tell you about it. What did I do? We've got Luis here. So when we included this image in the exhibition in the Telefónica Foundation in 2015, well, yesterday that was just the anniversary, 6 years. And you just walked by the image, and then the rice paper moves as if it were breathing, and our body and our relationship with the image generates something else. And I thought that was really impressive. It was amazing because it really reminded me of something that Antonio Damasio wrote, where he says, it's an example of how we remember the image of someone we love. And he says, our memory doesn't store the faces of the people we love as if they were Polaroids. He says that when our mind needs to remember a specific image of someone, of a loved one, the system demands information through a system with the strong interconnections that are neural interconnections, and this goes to areas where we store sensorial, affective, punctual data of the face and so on, and the reconstruction of all this fragmented information is what allows us to reconstruct in our visual cortex a virtual image of that loved one. Luis didn't know about this, but I think he did a true reconstruction of this. I always mention the example of my grandmother, where, I always remembered the smell of her hair. And this is something I'd have to represent in a fragment of some kind. But Luis did this description, this illustration, in nearly a literal way of how, this description of how our mind works through a very different process.
Discúlpame, ¿cómo llegas tú a esta imagen de Mobius?
How did you get to that image in Mobius? I totally agree with something you said. So, for example, I want to try and get away from the idea of photography as something that is bidimensional. So I try to do something. I called it like that. I try to do an expanded photograph so that the image could become a smell, a space, a flavor, to get out of a traditional conception or traditional concept of image. So it's called the skin. I decided to use rice paper because I felt that really was very similar to the skin of the face. So the title is The Skin of the Face. And that's one of the formal aspects of this decision. And then I also wanted to generate image that would interact with the other in a silent way, in a very subtle way, where the other is affecting the image and the image is affecting you. And this is what in fact happens to all of us. So when the body got close to the image, it affected it. And seeing that effect, people were surprised. And the basic idea was that, to create some sort of skin that would be, in a symbolic way, close to a portrait, and they wanted it to have a conversation with the other in a subtle way. But all those fragments are sewn sometimes only in specific places with a red thread. It's not nylon, is it? It's some sort of woolen thread, something that is very organic. So what's the meaning of that? It's a sort of circulating systems, but that are non-operative. The idea was to create a system that would be operational and non-operational at the same time, a circulating system. But then at the same time we see those threads fall at certain points. So that's the idea. This red thread gives cohesion to the image, and then at the same time it gets lost. It's a sort of paradox of this element giving it cohesion and then getting lost. Can we go back to John's images? Because there is something else there. And I'd like to talk about how we show those pictures. And so what are those processes and how they are linked to the body in a decisive way and sometimes in a conscious way? I don't know where it is. It's San Sebastian, but this is Luis. These are not your images. Can we have the other PowerPoint presentation, please? Now we will get mine, I suppose. Can you tell us, in the meantime, if you remember, there was this exhibit and this image next to a map of the sea waves, of the tides. So this idea of walking, of playing, this idea is very much linked to the idea of getting rid of something, of the mental thing, but also of the fact of being the author, that need of telling, I want to do, I want to say, because what I want to convey is, etc. This is something that is, in fact, very simple. I wanted to take pictures of how the sea was, you know, going against the land or reaching the land, and I didn't like the images. And then at home, this was a mistake, and I suddenly saw all these images at a very small size. And when I looked at that, I thought, that's like the sea free breathing. It's like that breathing in the sea. And there are 210 images here, 7 rows of 30 pictures, and these represents the breathing of the sea during 6 minutes, because I was taking pictures for 6 minutes from the very same spot. And this is what you see, these details, the rock, the water reaching the rocks in a wave, and how this wave turns everything into white. And then at home, when I analyzed the resulting shape, I thought, well, you know, all these storms that are so much linked to the moon generate a mosaic of 208 images that are also linked to the calendar of the year 2018, and of course every year's calendar too. And it's what has already been said. The art, you don't search it. You're not looking for it. You don't find it. It just takes place. And I think this is a very clear example of this. And this is very much related to what we said about the body. What is our relationship with this piece of art as spectators? This is usually placed very far away from the door of entry to the exhibition. So the very first thing we see is this. And you feel curiosity, and this is why you want to come close to this, to look at the images when you see the water and the rocks and how the water covers the rocks and makes them become white and how they go away. And so this is in fact an unconscious representation of the tide, how it goes to the rock, stays for a while, caresses the land, and then goes back again and separates. This way of interacting with spectators is what is now becoming more important, in my view, in exhibitions, so that it is not only a passive relationship. So now back to Jan, when we're talking about this process, the creation process, Jan, sometimes you've also shown how you separate yourself from that photographers do. Often because they want to share something, they go out to the streets and wait for the reality to show them, offer them something that will be related to what they want to share, and that's not that easy. And then other people, what they want to share, when they want to share something, they generate it through games like the ones John did earlier, and also the ones that you also do.
Sí, en este trabajo.
And yeah, in this work, I basically introduce ferrous salt or iron. And, well, one may think that, well, you do these things naturally, but, well, I am doing this cyanuricum at the beach, and there's this. Let's explain what this is. Okay, I'm going to tell you where this comes from and the images. So basically what you can see is a washi Japanese paper with a photosensitive solution on top. So if you put something on it, it works like a negative. The part that's exposed to the sun is blue, and the part that the object covers is white, because it does not get the UV rays from the sun. All right? So this, I'm at the beach of La Concha in San Sebastián. And yeah, tell us about the measurement, the dimensions of that paper. These are the small ones. It's 140 centimeters and by 80 centimeters. So you're just holding a piece of paper in the beach. Yeah. This paper, yeah, I'm not acting or faking. Yeah, actually this is, so photosensitive that all the fibers would open. It's like a Kleenex. This is just like a tissue, a wet tissue. It's super delicate. So I'm going to place this in layers and on plates that I hold with some pins. And what I do is that I get close to the sea and I plant this panel and I wait for the waves to come. And yeah, before you were talking about this idea, and I will, I'll place myself behind this kind of panel with such a delicate paper, and what I do is place sand here, and then I use the inclination and I allow the waves to place some sand in the paper. And so that the effect is like this: whenever there is sand, the sand is the object covering the paper, and the rays, the UV rays, don't cross, so it is white. So it's a kind of fight against the sea, because I'm just in front of the sea with a certain body. And it is a ferrous type of cyanotypia that is resisting against another salt, which is the salt of the sea. And here we have the iron oxide, because the cyanotype is oxidized and then it becomes red, like rust. And the paper is so delicate that this would be like the A side of the paper, and the other side would be the B side of the paper. And it is marvelous, because actually if you don't use the camera and if you just place yourself in front of the elements that you adore, you get these shapes which look like mushrooms or fungi or archipelagos. Actually, you're saying something beautiful, which is related to what you said previously. It's like just getting rid of that obsession of being the author and signing absolutely everything. Here, you're just letting the sea generate its own image. This is such a beautiful thing to say. It reminds me of Henry Fox in 1840-something. He just published a book, The Pencil of Nature. And it talks about this. And just it talks about a moment in which, regarding Talbot letters, it says that it would be wonderful to let nature draw its own image. And it's this simultaneity, because from different places here, from different moments in life, well, you get different answers and you get different sensitivities. And that's why I remember that one year we were covering at the Guangzhou Triennial, we were covering the topic of simultaneity, because something that had been deauthorized, I mean, the place of the second, right? The second who gets to the discovery. You know, it's you know, when you're second, somebody else has discovered something and you haven't. And this is so cruel, right? And you know, it's a hard blow to be the second. So I think that this reminds me of this kind of situation in which people from many different places and situations get to the same place, and to, you know, and we can talk about simultaneity instead of talking of copies or plagiarism. And I think that now we will cover some part of this topic, but now talking again about getting rid of certain things, there is a process which in the work of Luis González Palma that was mentioned at the beginning. It's this kind of bath of pewter where the body of Christ is eliminated, and in his work, in part of his work that we can appreciate in his PowerPoint, Luis, I guess that he's still not
Bueno, hay un
Well, there's a photographer, one of the oldest photographers in Guatemala, Juan José Jesus Yaz, who's responsible of the iconography of the second half of the 19th century in Guatemala. And there are many pictures that he took in a studio, but also there's a lot of iconography from churches. And this is concentrated in the Filmoteca of Guatemala, in a film where Luis faces again all these portraits, and he eliminates the subject of the portrait. And this comes at a time where Luis says that what he envisages with his personal work is to represent the nothing, which is very close to that concept of the void, that Taoist concept of the void. It's not necessarily the absence of things, because the void can be full, but there's a representation that we call the void, and this is more complex. And I would like Luis to tell us if there is this kind of representation, this kind of link between his images and the void. And I would like him to tell us about that correspondence with the Norwegian painter called Woods. Can you hear me, Alejandro? It's been 10 years since I do not take pictures anymore. I mean, I go walking, but I would just go walking to think. So the idea of what's indeterminate, of what John was talking about, of doing pieces of work where the author is not there, is so interesting. I am inspired by the thinking of John Cage. I think he's my bridge. He's the one who directed all these kind of works. I decided to start working from archives of my own work, but archives that I would find somewhere else, like in Cordoba or in Chirma, where there are different pieces of work. So the idea is to eliminate the portrait so I can leave the traces that are there on the plate. So it's like, not having control. Just didn't have control in the sense that environmental factors, temperature or the wear or the tear or the wrong use of all those plates, there is so much information contained in the image about all of this, about the wrong use, about the place where the plate was left, and all this information is so interesting to me. Because, well, the artist did something to those plates, but after that work made by the artist, there are some traces that remain in the plate. But it all comes from works that I didn't take the picture of. So it's like finding a world that is linked to our works, but at the same time we have no relationship with it. And the idea of relating this to the body of Christ, well, there's an idea here. The project started with that willingness to start synthesizing and leaving something that gets closer to the void, to the nothing, but the nothing, the void, that is a void that contains a kind of fullness. or in the case of Munch's works, to eliminate and to leave only the words that he stroked and the stains that he generated, the ink stains that he generated. It's paradoxical. It's somehow relieving the word from the burden, but also when striking that word becomes an image. It becomes a kind of structure. So it's like I'm still working with images from photographies that are present in journals that he wrote, and well, but you're ruling all this out. It's just like if you had some drawings, silent drawings, and somehow I believe that I did what the word couldn't say. Here I think I'm expressing something that the language does not express. I think that with visual arts, the most important is what is not. And the same, I think, about psychoanalysis. The most important thing about psychoanalysis is what you do not say, and the lapsus. And the same goes for the image. There is so much information that actually a lot is being said by not saying anything. And you just need to rescue information and silences. Let me follow with that video.
¿Lo puedes comentar, Luis?
Luis, can you comment on this? These are called the bones of water. It's very much related with that need that we have to fix what's real. But here, we're talking about the frustration, the impossibility to get the same image, because life goes by. And even though we have the illusion that with the photography we capture things, this tells us actually that it's like, you know, certain things that happen in nature, you just notice them. You notice them, but that's it. At the end of the day, you just have some traces. And those traces will become little pieces, little sculptures, if you want, because this is made from little branches. These traces in the drawing, I duplicate them with branches when they're green, and if I let them dry, they take the shape of the drawing. So this is something that is determined by nature, and it's called the bones of water because obviously, if it had not rained, we would not have this kind of solid water with the branch. Again, we go back to simultaneity. This reminds me immediately the myth of Sisyphus carrying the rock to the summit, and then the rock falls, and once and again he starts, and you want to fix this kind of constant movement, and it shows the impossibility. And there is such a beautiful video as well from Oscar Rowe, a Colombian artist. He uses a bowl of water and he paints with a brush his own portrait. And but the rock, he paints that on a stone, on the rock, but the rock is hit by the sun. So He just paints this with the brush, with water, but because of the exposure to the sun, water evaporates, so he still has to draw his portrait again and again. And this is a way to say that he's defining his identity. So you have continuously been working on the topic of identity. You've been working the topic of identity since the very beginning, but also something that you did, like Jon, was using the boxes of daguerreotypes in your work. We're sorry, we're having trouble to hear the moderator. Yeah, but I could hear.
¿Y ahora?
And now?
Ahora sí, perfecto.
Now it's much better.
No, te había escuchado. Ahora te escucho bien.
Jon nombraba procesos que
Jon was talking about processes that correspond to the beginning of photography. You also used many different techniques and processes with daguerreotypes and boxes of daguerreotypes. You've also incorporated contemporarily visors for stereoscopic photography. So you've used antique techniques, ancient techniques, but you want to somehow leave photography a little bit aside, and you have been deploying many different tools, and there is something so complex, like representation or the look upon something, and you're using those tools, and I'm trying to think what kind of relationship there is with all this. In other words, why have you been using so many ancient techniques for photography? Techniques that are even much, much older, like the techniques with all those abtroptic cylinders. You know, Alejandro, formally speaking, the way in which you approach an image or an object, depending on the material this object has, will be different. I mean, the same idea printed in rice paper or in glass will make the image be contemplated in a different way. So I use that very much, and I reflect on the material and technique that would be the most relevant, so that it contains an entire policy or an entire ideology that will be present in the work. So the range that I have, the range of materials that I have, is very important, because the history of photography is full of techniques that keep changing, and right now, with technology, there's also a possibility to print on materials that it was impossible to print before. So I try to be as free as possible to look at the relationship between the material and the image, because this is something that I find fascinating. Yeah, the microphone, please. You have to use the microphone.
Okay. Nos quedan 5 minutos.
We've got 5 minutes left. Life is eternal.
Bueno, no quería dejar de hablar del paisaje y de la
Actually,
relación que ha tenido Jon con el paisaje,
I
ese tratamiento que tanto
wanted to keep talking about landscape and the relationship that you had with landscape, Jon. Spiritual relationship with landscape. And actually, while we're talking about the first definition that is given about landscape, and it comes from many centuries ago, and it says that landscape tends to be spiritual. And this is related to how certain cultures undertake the representation of that. And there's a very good friend, a Chinese artist, who used to talk about this willingness to emancipate his work from his cultural roots, his roots of origin. And he says that one of his professors in Wu Wenchong at the Faculty of Fine Arts said that artists are like comets. They move in the air with liberty, with freedom, but they always have a thread that keeps it connected to the earth, to their tradition, to culture. And this Chinese artist told me, I want to cut that thread. And I've always told him that it was not possible. You will always have that connection. And I was talking about this to Luis the other day, and he said, well, maybe not cutting the thread, but I think Luis is frozen. Yeah, but can you cut that thread? No. No, but you can get it more loose. But the alternative for me would be to cut it. But you can't. Well, cut it or let it loose. All right, so letting it loose. This is like a loop, right? Well, anyway, we haven't got much time. I would like to say a couple of things with regards to Luis and to Jean. Two things that happened when when I've been interviewing them and everything. And they do something that is not so usual. They keep thanking people who have been listening to them. I mean, they keep being grateful whenever you propose something. And this way of getting into a dialogue, of just talking about their work, by thanking, I think that this is something that is very human, but sometimes nobody, says thanks. And I think that this is the essence that helps us understand, as Camille was saying this morning, or we were saying the other day, that what's important about a dialogue is to truly say something. So with both of you, this dialogue is very easy because you have this honesty. So I do thank you so much for taking part in this conversation, and I hope that you all enjoyed it.
No es nada evidente estas conexiones, ¿no? que supuestamente nos hemos acostumbrado a ellas.
These connections are not so easy, right? Sometimes, this year we have been used to connecting remotely, and this year we just wanted to have everybody in person, but life is life, and we're still in the pandemic, and this conversation is a reflection of the world in which we live, so that's why we were remotely connecting. And as Franck was saying this morning, we're having these conversations and disconnections, but at the same time, these disruptions and dissonances that may interrupt us when we try to go a bit more in depth. What was important for us, for me, it was very important to count on this presentation this work by two great artists that help us understand the complexity and the idea of feeding on many different elements so that we can build these universes. Well, if you have any questions, but if it's not the case, thank you again. We're now going to take 10 minutes so that we can start at 30 past, half past. I know that we're running a little bit late, and we will then give the floor to Camille Toledo for the final conference. He will not be here with us. The conversation will take place through Zoom, but we know that we will feel like he is with us. Give us 10 minutes so that we can solve the technicalities. Thank you very much, Luis, for being with us from Argentina. Thank you, John.